This case is freaking awesome. Let's talk about the Fractal Torrent right here on Robeytech. A big thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Just so you know, Skillshare is an online learning community with tons of awesome classes for creative and curious people like yourself or like me. Have you ever wanted to learn how to paint? Maybe discover the ins and outs of photography? Well, Skillshare has all of that and more in classes that are designed for real life to keep you moving forward on your creative journey. Like the Basics of Hand-Drawn Animation course by Johannes Fast. I love animation and I thought it would be cool to give it a try. I don't know, maybe I secretly want to make Robeytech anime or something. Johannes walks you through the basics of principles of animations in his course and teaches you the theory behind animating text, making an object bounce, liquid animations, and eventually a walk cycle. Let's just say by the end of the course, I think I'll have what it takes to get started on some sweet animations. And learning has never been easier with zero ads to interrupt your flow, and you can use the Skillshare no matter where you're at on your PC, laptop, tablet, or more. So click on the link on the description below to overclock your brain with Skillshare today. The first 1,000 people to use this link will get 1 month free trial at Skillshare. It is not too often, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, that we are able to see a new flagship case cross our build benches here at Robeytech. Now, when Fractal notified me that they were sending us a new airflow case, I was immediately excited, to be honest. The Fractal Meshify has been a staple of the airflow case world for a while, and it still reigns as one of the best airflow cases out there. However, there is a lot that I would like to see updated with the case. And with the new contenders like the Corsair 5000D, the Antec DF700, and even the Phanteks P500A, it looks like a good time for Fractal to pop in with a newly redesigned flagship case. Boy, did I vastly underestimate what something like that may look like. Enter the Fractal Torrent, the latest flagship case from Fractal, and spoiler alert, currently the best out-of-the-box, ready-to-go airflow case we have ever tested to date. But I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm getting excited. Now let's talk about what's included and what we can do with the Fractal Torrent. So Fractal said that the Torrent is a high-performance PC case designed entirely around the objective of delivering the highest possible airflow out of the box with conflict-free support for high-end hardware and unconventionally large cooling solutions. What did they mean by unconventionally large cooling solutions, you ask? Well, they are talking about these 180 by 38 millimeter PWM fans that come pre-installed in the front, along with 3 140 millimeter PWM fans that are installed in the base. You get a total of 5 very large fans directly cooling your PC hardware. I mean, when I unboxed this thing, I knew right away that we had to test this thing fully air-cooled and see just how much this case was capable of. But more on thermals later. I know, I'm excited, I get ahead of myself. So let's talk about some of the key highlights before we jump into what you can put in the case. Because there are quite a few things to cover here from a design standpoint. The case has an open front grille that I liked, but definitely open to people's opinions on if the design is cool or not. Regardless, what is cool, pun intended, is how little air impedance is in this design, and how much that shows up in our open versus closed case testing later on in the video. The case features a top-mounted PSU shroud, which I wasn't sure I was gonna like at the beginning, but after using it, I do like some of the opportunities it opened up for cable management. Not to mention just how much easier it is to get the PSU in. Finally, it's worth noting what the case is made out of. It looks heavier than it is. In a lot of ways, it shares some of the styling of the Phanteks Evolve X. However, unlike the Phanteks, the panels are made of a heavy plastic. They don't appear to scuff easily, and what I can say is when they say it guarantees a tight fit, they weren't lying. This thing goes together like a space shuttle. Now the case is, as we have it here, $229.99, which is pricey. I guess my point is that the materials are quality, as is everything about this case. And the more we used it, the more we were okay with the price. Okay, enough gushing. Let's talk about what you can actually fit in this case. For fans, there's a bit of a unique situation. In the front, you can fit 3 120 millimeter or 140 millimeter fans, or you can use the included 180 millimeter fans. For adding 120 millimeter or 140 millimeter, there is a bracket that comes included with the case, and you have to install it to make the switch. On the bottom, you have the option of 3 120mm or 140mm fans, but you can also install the 2 by 180mm fans at the bottom, which I would recommend if you do a front-mounted AIO. Now finally, in the rear, you can do a single 120mm or 140mm. There is no top-mounted fans in this case, or top-mounting AIOs, which I'm not used to, honestly. It made me a little sad. For radiator support, you have the option of either a 240, 280, 360, or 420mm radiator in the front. You can also do a 240, 280, or 360mm AIO in the front, though anything outside of 360mm from an AIO standpoint would look very odd. On the bottom, you can do a 360mm or 420mm radiator, and if you wanted to be evil, as they so to speak, because it's not a typical mounting for an AIO, you could also install a 360mm bottom-mounted AIO. Though you would definitely need to use one where the pump is on the radiator and not on the cooling plate, so you can make sure that the pump is not at the top part of your loop. Finally, for the rear, you could do a 120 or 140mm mounted radiator or AIO, whichever tickles your fancy. Okay, for clearances, here's the story. On motherboard, you can do the full gamut of motherboards from Mini ITX, which would look very odd, all the way up to EATX or even SSI EEB, or very big server motherboards, those like dual, TR4 level motherboards if you wanted to. For CPU cooler height, you can do up to 188mm, which gives you like that Noctua DH15, which we know works because we've used it, so we're doubly sure about that. For GPU clearance, you can do 461mm with no pre-installed front fan, or 423mm with the fan pre-installed. For any retail GPU, that is more than enough room. You could do that and probably add like a minivan. You have so much space, but there's probably some like server grade or some other things that could actually probably fill all that space. For PSU, because of the aerodynamic shape, you only get 230mm up top, but you do have some room for cable management in the compartment if you max it out, which is nice. It's the way to think of it is it's a triangle. So even though the 230mm is there, you still have a lot of room there to basically put cables, but you just can't extend the overall PSU shroud. For storage, you have 4 dedicated places to put 2.5-inch SSDs and 2 dedicated locations for 3.5-inch HDDs. There aren't mix mounts here because some people might be like, well, I'd love to use a HDD as an SD. You can't do that here, but seriously, 6 drives feels like a lot of space. On the cable management front, this is no slouch, and even goes above and beyond in some ways. Now, we aren't talking about cable routing trays like the Corsair 5000D, but you do have a lot of integrated tie-down points and routing via Velcro, 6 straps to be exact, in the back. There's a total of 32mm of cable routing space behind the backplate, which is more than ample, and all of the large holes have quality rubber grommets that are very nicely placed. The really cool thing for cable management though is that there are 4 Velcro strips in the back for routing the cables coming out of your tower. They are easy to take out and even use and even hide if you don't use them or choose not to and want to put them back later. Also worth noting in regards to cable management is the inclusion of a Nexus 9P Slim PWM fan. More than just being able to use the fans, this also allows connections to your AI pump, etc., and having that reported to your mobile if you connect the fan hub to your CPU header on the motherboard. Unfortunately, most pump connectors are not long enough to reach this, and not sure how many people would do this, but it is a cool option nonetheless. For front panel, you've got USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type-C with fast charging, 2 USB 3 ports, a headphone and microphone jack, and of course a power switch, which, that should come included, right? But hey, it's worth noting, you can turn it on. You get 2 dust filters on the front and the bottom, and last but not least, a couple of small, little neat add-ons. You get dedicated locations for underlighting RGB, if you'd like, and you have the ability to add screws to the side panels, so when transporting the case, you don't have just panels opening up and flying everywhere. Oh, and one other final thing. It comes with a GPU brace as well. Sheesh! When you have a massive new flagship case, there is a lot to cover in these reviews, and the Fractal Torrent does not disappoint. Now, enough about the opportunity though, let's dive in and do a build. The AMD Ryzen 9 5950X, 16 core, 32 thread, 4.6 gigahertz, the top end all be all of our current CPU stack. I want to test airflow. In this case, it has airflow, so we're going to be using the Noctua NHD15, their Chromex Black. We're going to be using this Corsair Vengeance LPX RAM. This is 3600 megahertz at CL16 for Ryzen, and it's that low profile stuff. For our motherboard, the ROG Crosshair 8 Dark Hero, absolutely love this motherboard. Currently on back order. We're using these Western Digital SN850. These are PCIe Gen 4. We're using a 1 terabyte and a 500 gig. So we're gonna use that EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3080 Ti. This is the Fractal Ion Plus 2 Platinum 860 watt fully modular power supply. This is 80 plus platinum. So anyway, there's our build. Let's go ahead and talk about our case first, and then we'll go into and start putting things together. So here it is, the Fractal Torrent. This is the latest flagship case from Fractal Design. The PSU shroud is actually at the top. You've got 2 additional screws, which you've seen, like Fantex has got them, others have got them, but here we go right here. And then you just basically rip it off. Here is the PSU shroud, it's at the top. This is actually cable management for your rear cables. So your HDMI cables, your power cables you can see these can actually pop out, and actually you can run all of your cables off of the side from the motherboard down inside of the case, which is actually pretty awesome. So it just pops off like that. It's actually got a dust filter that just kind of pops off to the side here. You just kind of lift up and it pops right off, which is nice. Let's go ahead and get the build inside of it. There's a little arrow in the top right-hand corner. You just want to line it up with the little arrow on the socket. It goes like this, and then you just close it out just like that. We're going to put one at the top here, and that down, and our motherboard is pretty much ready, minus the beast. Cable managed and done. Okay, so let's get this inside of our case now. Well, before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and quickly untwisty tie all this stuff and run these cables through to the bottom here. And there it is. Beautiful. Now, so everything we're doing here is just getting everything over and kind of out of the way. Let's get our GPU in, just like this. There it is, boom, look at that, with room to spare. Well, it's time to get our PSU, but our PSU is different this time because we're going to be mounting it on the top, a little bit different. Just shove this a little bit here, and then the build is done, ladies and gentlemen. Use these little things. I don't know, something different. I just haven't seen that on a case before. Okay, well, let's turn it on. And boom, there we go. All of that raw air power channeled for my entertainment and yours. So how was the building experience inside of the Fractal Torrent? In short, it was good and easy if you are looking to do a build the way the case comes pre-configured. I mean, you can see that the build process was pretty painless as I worked my way through building the PC. There is some considerations given that the PSU is at the top, but for the most part, nothing too challenging. Now, where I know things are going to get weird is when you want to do things like add an AIO or change out the fans. This case is really made to be used out of the box as is. And as you get more creative, obviously the more difficult the build will become. That's not to say it's going to be crazy hard, it's just a little less easy. Oh, And guess what? If you are considering using this thing for water cooling, there's pretty cool support there for that as well. It's got a fill port, pre-mounting for some really big reservoirs if you want to, and on top of that, you've got all the radiator support in the world, up to 420 millimeters. All that being said, a few things I found that weren't perfect. Number one, the fan hub is not ideal in its placement. There is a lot of cables for those fans, and having it in the bottom left in the case, which is essentially the shallowest part, where you can do the least amount with cable management, is kind of a pain in the butt. Number two, I wish, like a fan hub, they would have included an ARGB hub, specifically given that the fans are all daisy chain RGB, on the ARGB variant anyway. Given the cost of the case and how premium everything else is, it just kind of feels like a small miss. Three, the GPU brace is nice, but it is not necessarily the easiest thing to install. Reaching around such a massive case to get it placed isn't easy, and honestly, the adjustments require a screwdriver, which is kind of rough. It's still awesome to have one, but just know you may want to install it before you do anything else in the case versus waiting until the end. It is far easier to remove it if you don't need it than versus installing it when everything is already in. So what would I give the build experience in this case then? I'd give it a solid A+ if you were going to be doing an air-cooled build using the stock setup, and probably only an A, oh I know, big drop, if you were going to be using an AIO or potentially doing water cooling. It's an exceptional case, but there are some small repercussions to the build experience when you have such an exceptional out-of-the-box cooling setup when you need to almost completely reconfigure the PC for an AIO or custom water cooling, and the fact that AIOs are just so prevalent nowadays. Now, understanding this is moving from an A+ down to an A, so it's still pretty dang awesome. Okay, so enough about the building experience. Let's talk about what we really want to know. How are the thermals in this case? Well, in short, it's exceptional. Let's just set the stage here. We have a Ryzen 9 5950X being air-cooled by a Noctua DH15 Chromex Black. That is a hefty air cooler, but it is still an air cooler, and we don't typically air cool a 5950X. In fact, AMD says you shouldn't. So the thermals in our Fractal Torrent in a positive pressure configuration using two 185mm Prismal AL18 ARGB fans with three Prismal AL14 ARGB fans and a single NZXT 140mm exhaust fan were as follows. So at idle, in both the open and closed case configuration for our CPU, which means both open and closed were the same, we were seeing the 5950X sitting at a nice and frosty 38 degrees Celsius. However, when we turn the heat up and go full bore, 100% of this bad boy, we see the temperatures spike to an absolutely insane, wait for it, 72 degrees. 72! And only a 1 degree jump to 73 in the closed case scenario. To put that in perspective, that is almost 7 degrees less than our best case we've seen, and that was only cooling a 5600X. That is an unreal temperature for an air-cooled 5950X, and even more insane given you actually could do some overclocking if you wanted to and have plenty of headroom on the CPU with that cooler. Okay, so what about the GPU? Well, we have the same kind of story. At idle, we saw our EVGA RTX 3080 Ti sitting nice and cool at 37 degrees in the open case scenario, and only jumping to 42 when we close the case up. You know what else would look nice and cool? You in one of our Robeytech jackets, live now over at robeytechdeals.com/merch. Check it out. Now let's talk about when we punch it and start rendering all of those PC build memes. We see things get a little bit more toasty at 78 degrees in the open case scenario, and only a single degree jump to 79 in the closed case. Now, it's still a great temperature, but not the coolest we've seen, but definitely in the top overall. So what does this mean? What it means is that there is a lot of air moving through this case, and all of the components are benefiting from it greatly. The case excels for air cooling, and a CPU for any air cooler is going to benefit from these crazy 180mm fans feeding fresh air paired with those 340mm fans at the bottom. Well, that takes care of thermals, which are awesome, but how about the actual build you built in the case, Robey? How does that do when playing games? Well, I'm glad you asked. First up, for single-player RTX experiences, given this is an AMD Ryzen 9 5950X and an EVGA RTX 3080 Ti FTW3, Tomb Raider running at 1440p with DLSS on the highest preset, we saw an average frame rate of 185 FPS. That's awesome. For Metro Exodus, also running at 1440p, running with ray tracing on high and DLSS set to balance, we saw an average FPS across all of our runs of 87.83. Now, newer to the rounds that we have been doing is we've been adding some AMD experiences. And we wanted to make sure that we showed how those perform as well. So for Dirt 5 running at 1440p with ultra high graphics settings, we saw an average frame rate of 147.1 frames per second. That is butter. Lastly, and rounding out the single player experiences with Borderlands 3 running at the highest graphical preset, we saw an FPS average of 125.94. Again, super solid. So what about MP? Well, for Apex Legends running at low visual settings at 1440p, optimizing for competitive gameplay and high frame rate, we saw an average frame rate of 284.7 FPS. That is definitely high frame rate. How about Call of Duty Warzone? Also, low visual settings, 1440p. Again, set for competitive, we saw an average frame rate of 205.6 FPS. Perfect. And then finally for Fortnite, again at 1440p, visual settings set for competitive, crushing, absolutely smashing the 360 FPS barrier by a crazy amount, coming in at a mind-blowing 494 FPS. So basically, I would say this is almost the perfect build. Fanboys aside, this build is awesome. We have great frame rates plus awesome thermals. I just wish the whole build was sub $500. Okay, so wrapping it all up, Fractal has made something incredible. And I think like the Corsair 5000D and the Lian Li 011 Dynamic, we will be seeing this case pop up and become very, very popular. Best thing about it though, like the 5000D, it deserves it. It's great thermally, it's easy to build in, it has a lot of options, and unlike the Corsair 5000D, it doesn't look like a box. It's unique and edgy design that doesn't stray too far, but really does have a polished look about it. That's not to say the Corsair 5000D is ugly by any way, shape, or form, but this just has that je ne sais quoi. In fact, this is the first case we're going to be awarding the Robeytech approved CPU seal to. So congratulations Fractal, you truly made something special. Now, before you get crazy, I just want to make sure you're aware, we didn't have the seal when we did the Corsair 5000D or the P500A, they would have gotten it too. Well, it doesn't matter what I think, I want to know what you think. Do you like the look of the Fractal Torrent? Is this a case you would put your upcoming build in? And is this now a case that you're looking at moving forward? I'd love to know all of that down in the comments below. Now, while you're down there, make sure you slap that subscribe button, whip that like button, and ring that notification bell so you get a notification each and every time we go live right here on Robeytech or when we post a new video. Speaking of live, did you know that we have a live show? It's every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday starting at 5:30 p.m. right here on YouTube and also over on Twitch if you want to just come and see some awesome live builds. We also have an incredible community over at discord.gg/Robeytech if you want to talk about builds, if you want to talk about tech, if you want to basically just answer any questions. It's an absolutely awesome place to come and hang out. Finally, check out robeytechdeals.com where we've got daily deals on tech, basically Tom the Bot's always trolling the internet, and on top of that, we've also got all of our merch that is brand new, just went live. You can check it out at robeytechdeals.com/merch. Anyway, guys, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.